In the opening scene, we see a group of teenagers going about their activities on the school playground. Betty and Maya are busy chatting when Bobby, Betty's crush and first love, walks by with his friends to the basketball pitch. Maya encourages Betty to express her feelings to Bobby, whose relationship just ended. But she feels the odds of marrying her first love will be against her if she makes the first move, so she'd rather wait some years until he notices her. Bobby's ball accidentally rolls toward the girls. Betty passes the ball to him and seizes the opportunity to request for Bobby to hang out with her sometime, to work on their assignments, and share some Oreos. He smiles and accepts her request as he turns to go join his team. A while later, Betty and Bobby are having some Oreos in the schoolyard. Their conversation gets intense and they stretch their necks out for a kiss when Eleni, Betty's friend who likes Bobby, interrupts their moment. She angrily casts a hex on Betty and all her future boyfriends for approaching the very guy she's crushing on. Betty stares at her in utter disbelief. 20 years later, Betty is now a full-grown lady and she works as a risk analyst and actuary. However, she still experiences bad luck with her relationships. Something always seems to go wrong and she believes it has something to do with Eleni's curse years back. Betty joins Maya, who is waiting for her at the restaurant where they are to meet and plan for Maya's wedding plans. She shares her misfortune with her friend, who doesn't think she should remember a 20-year-old incident just because she's having a little bad luck with her relationships. She even asks her to mingle with some cute men at the restaurant. The next morning at the office, Betty presents a very impressive report before the board members and some other colleagues. She gets accolades for her presentation and an invitation to dine with her colleague Nelson. Betty smiles as she receives her praises. However, she subtly declines Nelson's invite because she is not up to igniting any sort of relationship with him. She gets home later in the evening trying to work on a report when she receives a call from her mother. Betty scoffs on realizing it's her mom because she intends on matchmaking her friend's son, with her not minding that she could be older than him. Since she isn't interested in the offer, she changes the topic. The next morning, Betty wakes up and realizes she's late for work, so she hurriedly gets her stuff together, hoping she will make it early to the office. She gets irritated as she is finding it difficult to make her way out of the building because a new neighbor is trying to move in. He apologizes for causing her delay. However, Betty isn't interested in his tale and she hurries out. On getting to the office, she meets the janitor, who teases her for coming to work on weekends. Seeing the empty chairs, she realizes that it's a Saturday and not Friday as she had thought earlier. She sighs and heads home to meet her new neighbor Alex. She discovers he is a photojournalist, and her room is directly below his. She excuses herself to go attend her workout class on the other side of town. Betty arrives at her workout session. The ladies chit-chat in low tones about the recent happenings in their lives as they follow the trainer's instructions. Maya dislikes the fact that her sister-in-law will be the one singing at her wedding ceremony, and there is almost nothing she can do about it, especially since her husband-to-be suggested his cousin anchor the music. Later on, when Betty arrives home, she runs into her new neighbor, Alex, on the elevator. They exchange pleasantries and start conversing when the elevator suddenly stops working. Betty starts panicking, breathing rapidly and almost losing control of herself. She screams and jumps in fright whenever the elevator jerks. Meanwhile, Alex tries to help and divert her attention from panicking by talking about her career and her ability to calculate risks. His attempt isn't working, so he tries talking about situations where he is supposed to panic, but he controls himself. When the elevator lights suddenly come on, it starts working again. Alex invites her out later in the day, but she refuses, saying she has had enough excitement for the day. Betty joins Maya and her fiancé Raul. She shares how she got stuck with Alex on the elevator. Maya gets excited on hearing that, while Raul suggests the incident might be life's way of fixing her up with her man. Betty quickly interjects, but Maya threatens her to approach the situation with an open mind, or she will set her up with a divorced math teacher in her school. Betty gives up on the argument and finally agrees to at least invite him to come along with her to their wedding. On getting home, Betty goes straight up to Alex's apartment to make a move and heed her friend's advice. Alex opens the door to see her. He is surprised to find out that she is now interested in the invitation for a drink she declined earlier. He wouldn't want to miss such an opportunity anyway, so he informs her that the invite is still open whenever she wants. Betty smiles satisfactorily. Hopefully, this time might be different. The next day, Alex and Betty hang out in an outdoor restaurant. They begin to find out some amazing things about each other as they discuss their experiences and places they've been to over the years. Betty confesses that he is making it difficult for her not to like him as they make a toast to fresh starts. Soon after their date, the duo walk home. Betty gets apprehensive whenever Alex looks like he's going to miss a step or someone might bash into him with a bike. He encourages her to set aside her fears of something bad ever happening to him just because it happened with her other friends. He invites her to a hike the next day by 6 a.m. and leaves her no choice but to accept. Immediately, Betty steps into her apartment. Her mother calls her to try setting her up with one of her friend's brother-in-law. Betty sighs and reveals she is just coming back from a date. She didn't want to get her mother's hopes high, that's why she did not mention it. Her mom could sense her fear of the curse thing popping up again. She encourages her daughter to not let go of a nice man just because she's afraid of a curse that might not even be real. Early the next morning, Alex comes knocking on Betty's door for the hiking adventure. He hands her a cup of drink immediately and she opens the door. She didn't know he was serious about the hike. She takes a sip from the cup and watches in admiration as he jumps in excitement, while informing her to get ready in 5 minutes so they can beat the early birds. In the course of their hiking, Betty admires the scenery, which makes Alex discover what she does on Saturdays. He is thrilled to realize that she plays golf sometimes, so he invites her to his rugby league. Immediately after the hike, Betty rushes to Maya's school to share how worried she is about this perfectly perfect Alex and his love for rugby. She is scared that he might experience misfortune from engaging in the sport. However, Mya also has worries of her own. She has problems with getting the peonies for her wedding. They encourage each other. After the discussion with her friend, Betty heads to work. She watches a rugby match on her system when her colleague Nelson walks over to her office. He stands for some minutes watching her in admiration before finally making his presence known. Nelson fans her fears by revealing that rugby is the most dangerous sport in the world. Her mood changes as she starts to think of what could go wrong with Alex on the field. The next day, Betty visits Alex and offers to take him out for brunch, but she gets disappointed on realizing that he would be unable to make it because he has to go play rugby. However, he invites her to come watch him play. She thinks her presence will reduce the chances of him being in danger, so she agrees to go with him. He is excited as he can't wait to show off how good he is. At the field, Betty watches in agitation as Alex and other players participate fully in the sport. She gets uncomfortable as she paces around yelling at the referee to do something, seeing that Alex is surrounded. Unable to hold her tension, Betty snatches the whistle and interrupts the game. She laughs meekly as everyone stops and stares while Alex asks why she interrupted an interesting match. On their way out of the field, Betty confesses her fear that he might get hurt. She apologizes for disrupting the game. Alex reveals that she has been in his thoughts quite often in recent times. Same with her. The next morning at the office, while Betty hands her boss, Mr. Stadler, some reports and briefs about her work, she receives a text from Maya. Betty arrives at Raoul's apartment to meet a weary-looking Maya and Raoul, lamenting how they lost a month's worth of food due to Raoul's faulty freezer. Her friends sadly share how burdensome it will be if Raoul takes out from their budget for photography and DJ to replace the food items. Coupled with the peonies issues, she feels so frustrated already. Betty can't help as she watches her best friend, who is always happy, lament in such devastation. She offers to pay the bills just to make her friend happy and give the couple an amazing wedding ceremony. After the emotional moment, Maya requests an update on Alex's game. Betty shares her little drama at the field and confesses how much she likes him already. Additionally, she's worried about what will happen when Alex finds out she's cursed. Later on, Betty goes to Alex's place and he excitedly introduces his sister, Amy, who is a professor. His sister is a leading professor at McCarthy, and Betty excitingly reads out a McCarthy quote she memorized. In amazement, Amy threatens to disown Alex if he doesn't marry Betty as soon as possible. Alex sees Betty off to the hallway, where he asks to take her out on a real date when he gets back from camping with his friend. Betty panics on hearing that. She couldn't take the whole thing anymore as she imagined him camping with lions, bears, and probably a pack of wolves. She quickly informs him that she can't see him anymore, not minding that she likes him. She claims that it's for his good, and she quickly gets into the elevator. Alex is perplexed because he thought she liked him already, but here she is saying she doesn't want to see him anymore. The next day, Betty meets with her friend Mya during their workout session. She confesses how terrified she is for Alex, because he will be going to camp out in the wild soon, and she can't help but think of what could go wrong, or him eventually hurting himself. Mya yells out in frustration because she has been listening to Betty's crazy stories for 20 years. To make matters worse, Raoul's mom made her invite 15 more people to her wedding, not minding that they'd already hit maximum capacity. Betty tries to console her friend and assures her something will work out eventually. Suddenly, she gets an idea to solve her curse problem. She thinks about finding Eleni and probably talks her into lifting the curse or something, so she can at least enjoy a relationship with Alex without any unpleasant occurrence. The next morning, Betty speaks with Maya as they try to figure out from their search list which Eleni Vrakos is the one they knew as teenagers. Nelson walks in, requesting that she go through his report probably over dinner. Unlike the way she usually dismisses him, she responds positively with a smile, asking his help with what she's working on with her friend. Nelson, who has been seeking an opportunity to spend some time with her, gladly offers to render his assistance with their search. Later in the evening, Betty informs Maya of Nelson's willingness to assist by helping her narrow down the search, by making a cross-reference of census records with birth and marriage certificates for the past 30 years. She invites Mya out to camp with her so she can get an opportunity to monitor Alex and keep him safe from danger. Her friend agrees because it is just the perfect distraction to get away from planning her wedding. The following morning, the ladies set off, secretly following Alex and his friend. Alex shares his confusion about Betty with Jack while they build their tent, when they suddenly hear a branch snap not too far off. Jack promises to leave if he hears another sound or notices someone else's presence. Meanwhile, the ladies suddenly hold still to avoid getting noticed by the guys. Unknown to them, some other campers have seen them and they question why they are sneaking up on the men. Betty quickly lies that she's dating one of the men. They proceed to watch Alex fish with Jack. She sighs as she watches her friend anticipate an unfortunate happening anytime soon. It's getting really cold as the day gets darker, but Betty wouldn't let Maya start a fire for fear that it might lead to something big like a wildfire. They hear a growl and they try to listen in case it turns out to be an animal, but don't hear anything. Later on, Betty becomes restless as she tries to sleep but keeps thinking that something might be outside. She wakes Maya up as she uses her binoculars to check on Alex. She finally admits she is just stressed and apologizes to Maya for waking her up. They soon recall Betty's first sleepover in the backyard of Maya's house as kids, and they laugh about how restless she was. The ladies suddenly hear a branch snap close to their tent. They scream in fright as the sounds of animal chitters fill the air. Alex and Jack rush out of their beds to trace where the sound is coming from. They run with their torches trying to find the bear, only to see Betty and her friend curled up in fear within the bushes. He is surprised to see her, and she confesses that she is simply worried about him, which is why she decided to come along without his knowledge. Alex stares at her in confusion, especially after remembering she said she doesn't want to see him anymore. The next morning, Betty tries to reach Alex's phone, but all her attempts are futile because his phone is unreachable. She stares into her computer screen, scrolling through his photos on his social media handle. Nelson waltzes into her office, congratulating her on closing a deal. He hands her the list from his search, apologizing for not being more precise. Betty is elated that he could even narrow it down to 4 people, so she picks up the list to go through it. She can't wait to rid herself of Eleni's curse. Later on, Alex meets with his sister and he pours out his heart to talk about the whole Betty issue. He thinks he didn't properly handle the situation at the camping site. His sister advises him to let things play out. Meanwhile, Betty and Maya try calling each of the contacts Nelson supplied. Unfortunately, none of the first 3 was the Eleni they were in search of, and the last person doesn't have a contact number. Mya offers to join her best friend, Betty, to go visit the last address. Early the following day, when they are supposed to go on the search, Mya breaks down in tears, lamenting her wedding venue being double booked, and the most painful part is that Raul doesn't think it's a big deal. Betty listens on as her friend thinks everything is just going wrong with her wedding. She assures Maya they will find a way around it when Raul rushes to his fiancée while Betty watches the duo in admiration. After the couple reconciles, they realize Betty has been watching them with a smile on her face. Maya remembers Alex, so she asks Betty about him. Betty confesses she doesn't know how she will explain to Alex that something terrible will happen to him if he gets too close to her. She thinks there is no need to remedy the situation as it might be for the best. Maya remembers they still have one more Eleni Vracos to check out. That means there is hope for them. Maya and Betty eventually arrive at the address. However, they are surprised to see an old deserted store. At Maya's behest, Betty joins her friend to go see who, or what, is in there. They meet with a fortune teller who reveals the only Eleni she knows was in her past life, but she has a spell which could take off even the most powerful curse, but it will cost them $144.99. After meeting with the fortune teller, the ladies decide to test if the spell is potent. Betty will go on a date with Nelson to check out the potency. Later in the evening, Betty gets back home from her boring date with Nelson and she looks so unhappy. A call comes in from her mom who intends to set her up with her friend's nephew. However, Betty pours out her heart to her mom, confessing that at this point, she thinks nothing will ever work out with any man in her life. Beverly is sad to hear this, so she promises not to interfere with her love life, because she trusts Betty to handle it how she deems fit. Alex comes to Betty's apartment to talk about the camping incident. Betty finally confesses how mortified she feels. He has heard about it from his sister, but wishes Betty had just told him, instead of being overly worried. Nevertheless, he smiles and reveals to her that he doesn't believe in curses, so she has nothing to fear. Betty sighs in relief but still explains that she has never had a boyfriend who didn't experience an unfortunate happening. She would like them to try again if she hasn't completely ruined everything between them. They soon get into the house and catch up on pastimes while Alex prepares something he claims would dazzle her taste buds. The meal turns out tasting horrible. Betty pulls him close to her, confessing how she finds something very endearing about him, and they kiss each other. The next morning, Betty walks over to Nelson working on the photocopier. She intends to apologize for the previous night and inform him that they can't work out. To her surprise, Nelson apologizes for leading her on emotionally because, after the previous night, he knows for sure that they cannot work. Betty smiles as she listens to him say he wants a woman who is fun and brings more to the table. Their boss, Mr. Stadler, soon disrupts their conversation as he calls everyone into the boardroom. Everyone is gathered at the boardroom and he informs them of a fire incident inside one of the buildings, and it is the Retroveld project which they just secured. To make matters worse, the building still contains dangerous and flammable materials. He further notes the possibility that a construction crew might still be trapped inside. This is the project Betty is working on. When she gets to the site, she meets firefighter trucks driving in and out of the vicinity. She looks around the destroyed building filled with news channels and reporters when she suddenly spots Alex, who's on an assignment taking pictures of the building. She calls out to him, trembling in fear that something hazardous might happen to him. Alex explains he has to work, so she need not worry about him getting hurt. He hears a voice calling for help, but the firemen are not willing to risk going into a gas leak just yet. Alex asks Betty to get help while he goes to rescue the person inside the building. She shouts his name, telling him to not risk his life, but he wouldn't listen because he is already trying to open a door into the building. Betty rushes to where some firefighters are standing, informing them of Alex and the person who called out for help. The men rush to the back entrance and warn everybody off because the smell of the gas intensified. Almost immediately, a loud explosion happens and everyone around falls to the ground. Betty falls to the ground in tears as the thought of Alex perishing in the explosion overwhelms her. She suddenly stands up on hearing his voice, calling out for medical assistance. She rushes to meet him as he hands over the victim to the medical team. Alex apologizes for making her scared and pleads with her not to carry out her threat to end their relationship and abandon him. Betty sobs as she explains how fortunate he is to get out of that dangerous zone alive. He grabs her and kisses her passionately. The next day, Betty meets with Meyer at their usual class and she reveals the fire incident and how he rejected the offer to do a piece on how he saved a man's life. She exhales in relief as she shares her excitement that nothing happened to him. She thinks that the curse is officially broken. Meyer is happy that her friend is finally willing to let the curse go. Mr. Stadler stops Betty halfway down the office hallway to inform her that everyone is safe and everything is under control now. She sighs in relief and apologizes for not having a contingency plan in case of such an incident, but he assures her it's possible to have some uncalculated risks, since one can't always plan for everything. Alex calls her and they agree to go on another date later in the day. Alex anticipates the date with so much excitement. He dresses up, carrying flowers, and dancing through the apartment hallway and down the stairs until he misses a step and lands on the floor with a thud. He wakes up in the hospital hours later. The doctor informs Betty and Amy that he is lucky to not have any internal bleeding, but he needs to be more careful. Betty is already teary as the fear of the curse surfacing comes up once more. She reveals that she can't continue the relationship before heading out of the room in tears. When Maya meets with her outside, Betty says she's still jinxed and she needs to get away as everyone she loves still gets hurt. The next day, Betty visits the outdoor restaurant she and Alex went to on their first date. She smiles dryly as she orders the same thing they ordered. She receives an unexpected phone call from the girl she has been searching for, Eleni. Betty is shocked that she remembers her. Later on, Maya accompanies Betty to go visit Eleni. Maya brings up the curse as she narrates her ordeals, and she pleads to Eleni to help her. Eleni is lost because she can't even recall what they are talking about. Betty tries to refresh her memory of the incident that happened while they were in middle school. Eleni laughs, confessing that she doesn't know anything about curses and that the curse was just something silly she made up. She also confesses that her mom worked at a bank and she just made up the story that her mother is a mystic because it sounded interesting to her. Betty is stunned that she has lived the past 20 years carrying on a false belief. Eleni apologizes for messing with her mind. In the next scene, Betty runs into the hospital to meet with Alex and they finally sort things out. She reveals that she just found out the curse is not real and she had lived her life scared that something bad will happen to anyone she loves. The lovebirds grab each other in a deep kiss right on Alex's hospital bed. Time passes and Betty is finally getting married to Alex, while Maya is now pregnant. Betty looks stunning in her wedding dress. The lovebirds say their vows to love each other forever. After the wedding, Betty sets out to join Alex on the rugby pitch wearing matching outfits. He teases her for wanting to embark on dangerous adventures with him. Her mindset has changed and she believes having each other is much better than any luck in the world. She kisses his lips before running to join other players on the pitch.